Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. That is Brant spelled with a Brant. My channel on YouTube is Discerning What Is True. And what I'm going to be doing today is be reading from a book called Bats in the Belfry, The Case Against Mental Health by Ellen, Ellen, McClay, MC, capital Clay. And I'm going to be reading from the first chapter here. Just go chapter by chapter. I did want to give a little bit of what they call a prologue here, the references that she used back in 1964. This is the book right here. I'm trying to wonder if it's self-published. No, it's published by a company called Rosewood Publishing Company out of Los Angeles, California. I bought this book used in 2019. I've had it for a couple of years, and I noticed that people can't get the book. So someone reminded me today about it, and so I'm going to share it. Okay. So first, I'm going to read a little bit of the prologue here, what she's used as references. So let me get the lamp here a little bit closer. Basically, she goes through the scope of the Soviet activity in the United States, a Senate subcommittee of investigating subversive activities, patterns of communist espionage. This is a House Committee of Un-American Activities. She also has a Senate subcommittee also investigating subversive activities. George Skokolsky, I'll say this again, not say it again, I'll spell it to you, Sokolsky, column, June 18, 1960. My 10 years as a counter spy, Boros, Boros, Morris, Mooros by Viking Press. 8, report on education, Dilt Work Committee, California Senate Investigating Committee on Education. Annual report, 1949. House Committee on Un-American Activities. That's all it says. Scope of Soviet Activity, Part 26, Senate Subcommittee to Investigate Subversive Activity. So all this is going to be what that. You go on down here and you get Mental Health Council for Inception, Mental Health and World Citizenship publication of the World Federation for Mental Health, National Mental Health Association, Annual Reports of the World Federation for Mental Health, 1948 to 61, Sigmund Freud and the Jewish Mystical Tradition by Bakan, spelled it Bakan, Van, Van, Nostrand, I'll spell that for you, Nostrand. National Lawyers Guild, House Committee on Un-American Activities, Report 3123 in 1950. USA Alice Winder, spelled Widener, publisher, article by Ida K. Roosevelt, 120-59. New York Times, November 11, 1959. Personal letters to the author from Senator Eastland, Department of Immigration and Naturalization at Harvard College. And testimony of Alexander Orlov, spelled Orlov, September 9, 1955, and it was released in 1962. So here we go. Chapter 1. Everybody but me and thee. Okay. I think 1 out of 1 has mental illness at some time in life. Anyone under enough pressure responds with emotional maladjustments, with depression, excitement, or alcoholism, or some other effort to escape. With these words, William Megner rang the bell for mental health to reporter Don Ryan of the Los Angeles Herald and Express just prior to a town hall meeting on June 15, 1954. 2 years later, on December 2nd, 1956, Megner was still ringing the same bell to the closing session of the 6th annual convention of the National Association for Mental Health. Milligan said, I spelled that Menninger, the statistics on the incidence of mental ill health has been variously cited as 1 in 16, 1 in 12, and 1 in 10. We have tended to overlook the common everyday emotional disturbance, which can be as upsetting and incapacitating as many of the physical illnesses. He added, when we take these into account, the total mental ill health must be reckoned as 1 in 1. I'm going to explain something here before I continue on. Mental health is they cannot give you a definition of sanity because there is no definition for sanity. Okay, so they just choose and pick whatever they see as being insane. Okay, there's a video of this. Actually, someone interviewed these people at a I guess it was a symposium or something of that nature, a conference, and none of them could actually answer the question on video. Okay, so this is just done on purpose, folks. So he added, when we take these into account, the well-intentioned reckoned 1 to 1, for there isn't a person who does not experience frequently a mental or emotional disturbance severe enough to dispute his functioning. Milliken's Topeka Foundation is frequently subsidized by government funds. In 1961, he received, this is quite a bit of money, folks, $198,080 from the U.S. public health care system. Milliken spends a minimum of 100 days a year on the road, pleading the cause of mental health with industrial tycoons, Rotarians, Kiwanis, Lions, Elks, Eagles, and sundry others. He declared that mental ill health does not always show up in an obvious clinical pattern, but that it may take the form of such things as vagueness, gnawing, anxiety, or depression, ill-conceived feelings of suspicion, fear, resentment, and hate, a variety of physical complaints which have no organic basis, aggressive acts directly against specific individuals. Or against society in general, and marital difficulties, occupational troubles, and school problems. Some years later, the National Association for Mental Health was moved to defend Dr. Milliken's definition of mental ill health, which referred to the emotional upset of everyday life to which even the healthiest persons in subject, so they could be combated whenever possible in order to reduce suffering. The National Association failed to identify those who would be doing the combating, nor did the association point out that what was being promoted with attendant national publicity was a psychiatric theory and not necessarily true. Continue. Many such reactions are safety valves which prevent serious illness by the very act of releasing emotions. As an example, during the war, psychologists said there's a common belief that a man is a coward or a sissy if he shows fear when threatened by danger. This is nonsense. Fear is a very definite mental reaction transmuted into physical action when bodily harm seems apparent. To have no reaction at all to stress situation would probably indicate a very serious mental problem. The average person takes everyday problems in stride, considering how drab life might otherwise be, with neither ups nor downs. These are not necessary indicators of mental illness or a need for psychiatric services. Milliken, the acknowledged giant of American psychiatry, probably quite unintentionally imputed the statistics of his psychiatric bell ringing progress when he wasn't too sure whether it was 1 in 16, 1 in 12, or 1 in 10. The Southern California Society for Mental Hygiene, now Los Angeles County Foundation for Mental Health, had already added its voice to the clamor of the national mental health bell, as well as a new figure on the incidence of the disease pattern. At the same time, Milliken claimed a figure of 1 to 1 to 1 to 16 in 1954. He said, 1 in 20 persons will spend part of their life his life in a mental hospital. At that time, if the figure was 1 in 16 was correct, that meant a total of 10 million persons were ill, that is mentally ill. If 1 in 12 was correct, the figure would be 13.5 million, and if 1 in 10 equals 16 million mentally ill. There are always those, however, who never get the word. Even while Milliken was citing his 1 to 1, some of his psychopolitical brethren in the field were giving an even different figure, one that didn't jive with any of the 1 in 1s. In the Southern California Society for Mental Hygiene, in a speech which pledged him to advocate with all the strength at my command, the passage of mental health legislation took place in October 4th, 1954, when Governor Goodwin Knight of California said there is hardly a family in all of the state of California which has not been touched directly or indirectly, by the dread knowledge that one of his members requires mental treatment. Ike said that 9 million Americans are afflicted with mental illnesses. So that's based in 1954. He wasn't alone in saying it either, even though an extension of all the ones in such and such did not produce a figure of 9 million Americans. The National Association for Mental Health in the 1952 brochure entitled Facts and Figures About Mental Illness and Other Personality Disturbances gave as their first fact, it is estimated there are about 9 million people in the United States suffering from mental illness and other personal disturbances. So let's just see this figure here. You got to understand that probably the population of the country was probably less than 200 million at that time. So that's quite a big part of the number if they're claiming this is true. Okay. In October 1953, in a hearing before the House Committee on Interstate and Foreign Commerce, George Stephenson, vocalist for the International Cadre, a bell ringing pleading for alms from the American taxpayers, said, of course, there are other mental illnesses that bring the total up to as many as 9 million people, but many of these are not as seriously and economically incapacitated. What else completely incapacitated as estimated 9 million period for so long? 1 million, he would say 1 million psychotic and 250,000 low-grade mental defectives, unaccounted severe alcoholics and severe neurotics. Speaking also before the name of House in the same group called the House Committee was Robert H. Felix, spelled F-E-L-I-X, a career employee of the federal government, director of the National Institute of Mental Health. In 1961, the PHS gave 8,066 awards in the field of medicine, totaling over $132 million. A little over 1,800 of these grants went to mental health projects, which were over $42 million being dispersed. So you see, this is about money here, okay? The louder they cry about all this problem, the harder they try to get more money. So they may be, in a lot of ways, skewing the reports in order to, quote unquote, get more money. In a recent article by Dejurgen, spelled that D-E-J-U-R-G-E-N, Ruesch, spelled R-U-E-S-C-H, professor of psychiatry at University of California at San Francisco School of Medicine, indicates Big Brother has made great strides in medicine through research grants from 60 to 63. The HEW spending on health, I think this is health, education, and welfare. This used to be, that's all been broken up. It's not broken up, actually. Yeah, it's been broken up and they've created other divisions. Anyway, in health increased 107.3% from 494 million to 1.024 million. Dr. Ruesch complimented that the staff of the National Institute of Health is only 33% scientific or professional personnel. 8% of these are MDs. So I assume he's talking about medical doctors, or is he speaking about master doctor? Master, I don't know. He just says, she just says MDs, and another 7% PhD. So I don't know if she's talking about master degree or she's talking about medical doctors. We'll just have to go from there. The balance are laymen, lay workers, out non-scientific personnel on every research project sponsored by the federal funds, and are, said Dr. Ruesch, impeding medical research and consuming 20 to 30% of each research grant and administration costs. The statement prepared by Dr. Felix and his NIMH staff for the hearing on mental health is printed in the body of the hearing. The heading indicates that the statement was prepared for the Committee on Interstate and Foreign Commerce on the House of Representatives back in October 8, 1953, by the National Institute of Mental Health, National Institute of Health, Public Health Services, United States Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Much of the prepared statements had already appeared, however, in an article Felix, F-E-L-I-S, wrote a collaboration with another government employee for the Annuals of American Academy of Political and Social Science on March 1953. The Congressional Committee was told at least 6% of the total population, that is 9 million people, suffer from serious mental disorder. This estimate is based on the findings of two widely quoted surveys One done in the Eastern Health District of Baltimore, Maryland, by Lemkau. I'll just spell this for you. Lemkau. Tisley, Tietze, and Cooper, and the other is Williamson County, Tennessee. Although their surveys are not entirely comparable, their findings make it clear that in both surveys, persons with psychotic disorders, the illness which for the most part requires mental hospital care, constitutes only 10% of the cases found. Disorders classified as psychoneurotics and personality disorders of adults and children accounted for the large bulk of all cases. Some ideas of the distribution of various mental disorder in the population can be attained from Table 1 and 2, which presents the results of the 2 case finding surveys. It is highly improbable that any of the congressional men looked at either Tables 1 or 2 to see the distribution of Baltimore and Williamson County mental health survey, nor was their attention called to the fact that the surveys were taken in the year 1936. Interesting. So their report is almost 20 years old. During the Depression, such as the county had never known. So during the Depression, correct. People are under a lot of stress even then. Where's the money? Don't have a job. You see. Most are trying to provide for their family. Enormous stress to that. We also have the other encounters that are taking place across the country with the Oklahoma Dust Bowl. People looking for jobs. They leave their farms. They just take off. They're just looking for ways of earning money. Nearly 20 years and one world war later, the psychiatric brilliant bell ringers were still projecting those same depression estimates nationally to come up with a figure of 9 million American mentally ill in the midst of the most affluent society ever known. It's probably very doubtful if the Congress saw the annuals article, which threw a little more insight on the method of the surveys and the type of community on which they were based. Felix and Kramer very carefully possessed the nature of the surveys for their scientific colleagues, which they did not do for the House committee members. First, we need a definition of whom we are to count. Who are the mentally ill? Second, we need techniques for detecting cases for mentally disorders. This is not a simple matter. We are not dealing with a simple single entity, but a broad variety of disorders characterized generally by abnormal gestures of behavior. After a careful listing of organic factors, psychosomatic disorders, and a broad group of personality disorder, Felix and Kramer said, in addition to defining the types of abnormal behavior we wish to define, we must also specifically whether we are looking for individuals who have exhibit such behavior at any time in their lives or only during very specific periods of time. They demonstrated clearly that agreement on whom to count was difficult, as well as methods of case finding and diagnosis. Yet, they said, despite the difficulty of definition and case finding, estimates have been made of the extent of the problem of mental disorders, and we have become apparent from the review that follows. This data have become apparent from the review that follows. This data have many shortcomings. Nevertheless, it will also become apparent that they all point to a single fact. Mental disorders are a major cause of illnesses and disability in the nation. It is on these data with many shortcomings estimated that the figure of 9 million mental ill were based. The Eastern Health District was an area of 1 square mile, described by Felix and Kramer at the time of the survey in 1936. Again, during the Depression. The population of the area was around 55,000. It was a residential area, 1/4 black. Among the whites, many families were Hebrew and Czech. The income level of all groups were well below the citywide average. Yet, this was the basis of 1933 establishment of national test. So, in other words, when you do a poll, I've done this myself in a poli-sci class. When you conduct a poll, you don't go. If you're going to do this, you go throughout the whole city or whatever community. You just don't go to specific one area of groups of people at that time. That's also going to skew the numbers for sure. You see, All right. The Williamson County, Tennessee survey was of a similar nature. The county, as described by Felix and Kramer, had an area of 586 square miles, largely agricultural in nature. The population of this area was 25,000 people. This was one quarter black, while the rest was mostly native white of English or Scots-Irish extraction. In Baltimore, the survey was conducted by a search of the records of 43 institutions and agencies that dealt with mental health problems. No cases were examined by the survey staff psychiatrists. In Tennessee, the method used was one that was to crop up nearly 30 years later and to be the cause of much unrest. Not only was the cases finally done by searching reports of health, social, and welfare agencies, but also through reporting to the survey staff persons suspected as being mental health problems by physicians, nurses, teachers, clergymen, judges, and others in contact with large number of citizens. Again, it's skewed. You see, this is how these things are done. I would think that some congressmen would have the audacity to say, "Excuse me, where do you get this? How big was the size of your quote unquote asking people?" Instead, that was never asked, or as far as I know, what she's sharing is it never was asked at all. So let's continue on here. There were basic differences in definitions used in the two surveys. In the Williamson County survey, cases described as active were those which, in the opinion of the tattletales, representing severe social to mild personal problems, and the inactive being essentially those making an adequate adjustment to their environment. It should be noted that persons who are adjusted to their environment are considered inactive. Like a stink volcano, which, if not carefully watched, might erupt. In other words, they live in the haze of constant suspicion directed towards them by the mental health bell ringers. In spite of the stated shortcomings of the methods and techniques of the survey, Felix and Kramer in 1932 came to the same conclusion which had been reached by the original research team and all their long lines of descendants since 1936. When all the facts are taken into consideration, however, these data suggests that at any one time, at least 6% of our population suffer from some type of serious mental disorder. In 1954, the Social Yearbook carried an article that was reproduced by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, which gave entirely different sets of figures based on the same 36 surveys. Apparently, it all depends on who is interpreting the figures and the purpose of the interpretation. Felix was before a committee of Congress looking for more money. Okay, ergo, E-R-G-O, the most horrible, a picture of the mental illness in the U.S., the more money, particularly if the congressmen are not informed that mental illness, as the witness uses it, isn't the same thing as Congress was thinking of. So the second year of the Social Yearbook, however, was evident just reporting true illnesses, it said. A survey done in the Eastern Health District of Baltimore by this particular group, Lemke, Teskin, and Cooper, showed a rate of 3.1 per 1,000, and a survey in Williamson County, Tennessee, by Roth, R-O-T-H, and Luton, L-U-T-O-N, a rate of 4% per 1,000. Yet, in his congressional committee statistics, gave the Baltimore survey as 60.5 cases per 1,000. See, they skewed it. They skewed it again in order to get more money. This is what goes on, folks. If you think it's bad then, this is the 1950s, okay? So if you think it's bad then, what do you think is going on now, okay? All right, let's think about that. So they would lie then. What do you think they're doing now? As sure as they're telling the truth, I can guarantee you that. So let's continue on. Are 20 times more than the results shown in the Social Yearbook. In Tennessee, Felix has shown a figure of 69.4% by comparison to the 4% per 1,000. So the 3.1 result projected nationally produces 570,000 people, while 4 per 1,000 results in 720,000, both of which are more nearly the actual number of hospitalized victims. These figures did not appear in Felix's testimony before the House committee. Continue on. As many an alert American knows, there have been more recent mental health surveys of the type conducted in Tennessee so long ago. These surveys projected on a national level are probably the basis of the newer figures the psychopolitical bell ringers are hurling at us. Let me take a break here. The old Dominican mouthful of 1 and 1 cropped up again in May of '57. Nathan W. Ackerman of Columbia University, addressing the 59th annual meeting of the National Conference of Jewish Communal Service, declared, "Cancer attacks 1 out of 20, polio 1 out of 5, but mental illness affects 1 out of 1." This is so ridiculous, folks. It's just a joke. This means that at some time in the life of everyone there occurs an emotional or tantamount to illnesses. In '58, the Los Angeles Times reported that 1 in 18 reported is in trouble mentally. While a year later, Dr. Walter Alvarez reported some 17.5 million persons in the nation have enough nervousness or mental diseases to require treatment. He was quoting Dr. Jack R. Ewalt, E-W-A-L-T, director of the Joint Commission on Mental Illness and Health, which was established by Act of Congress of the United States. Ewalt is also, of course, a member of the World Federation for Mental Health. So again, it's political skewed. It's all there. The staggering increase in only 3 years, National Mental Health Committee had published a figure of 10 million in March of '56, was even then not the end of the spiraling epidemic of statistics on mental health. By 1962, the Advertising Council in the Public Service Advertisement of Television was stating, as a fact, that the number of mentally ill was now up to 18 million. A featured writer for the Herald Tribune News Service, Earl Ubell, spelled U-B-E-L-L, on April 23, 1962, released the information that only 1 person in 5 is free of adverse psychological symptoms. This even more startling development was the result of the survey conducted by a psychiatric team in Manhattan, Upper East Side. Ubell's analysis at the report states a second myth concerns the tour increase of mental illness. In recent years, the amount of mild mental illness has decreased in the last half century. In the last 100 years, the rate of severe mental illness has apparently remained constant. It has not increased. Emphasis added. The scientists surveyed 1,660 people. Okay, so this is to tell you how many they actually surveyed. Okay, out of 175,000 living in the area to reach their conclusions. So what they got here is probably what we call less than a little less than 1%. Let's see if that's right. Yeah. Neighborhood range from luxury apartments to congested slums. Their survey indicates that 81.5% of the population suffer from mild, moderate, impaired symptoms of mental disorder. Again, when they say simply range from luxury apartments to congested slums, they're going through a wide deal. So they are trying to cover all areas, particular. So it's not all bias. Okay, that's the first thing I see here. This actually stands out. From mild, moderate, or impairing symptoms of mental disturbance. This survey different from the others in that psychiatric social workers who conducted it had a questionnaire and allotted 2 hours for the answering of its 200 questions. Hungarian-born Dr. Paul Hoch, H-O-C-H, New York State Commissioner of Mental Hygiene, while favoring the survey, felt the study's findings were subject to misinterpretation. He stressed the importance of analyzing the survey methodology and critically, indicating these might not be definite. Dr. Hoch said, having read parts of the Midtown study, I believe some of the criteria applied to measure disturbance can be interpreted as being too broad. Some person, for instance, may admit to this or that conflict, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are sick or need help. The ability to cope with situations is very difficult to evaluate, particularly in a single short interview. The results of this survey have been published in a book called Mental Health in the Metropolis at $9.95. The men's magazine True, in reviewing the book, labeling its contents various as moonshine, flumpery, claptrap, bungo business, sensational lies, conclusions. So, not much stock here, folks. No doubt many will agree with True editor's conclusions that sociologists should be employed in the study of the extra brain in the rear of the dinosaur, a useless study which might even conclude that too many brains lead to extinction. In no case, at no time, do the promoters of these statistics ever indicate to the general public or to the selected audience that these figures are no more than educational guesses. Okay. On the part of half a dozen scientific researchers. So you're talking about 6 people. Only in a completely regimented society could they be thoroughly checked to the point where the figures could be considered scientific facts rather than theoretical assumption. If a shifting, amorphous society such as our own is impossible to make such statements as matter of facts. This should not be true, however, of the members of persons actually confined to the mental institutions who are more or less stationary. Yet an examination of the figures used in this conception of this connection by the bell ringers shows the same careless unconcern with the facts. All of the propagandists for the mental health movement are agreed that mental ill healthness is the nation's number one health problem. It is so because they say so. Scarcely more than 2 of them, however, will give the same figures as to how many persons are confined to mental hospitals throughout the country. The number seems to vary in direct proportion to the amount of money being requested from the American taxpayers and by whom. All the statisticians will quote their favorite gambit that more than half of all the hospital bills in the country are occupied by the mental health illness. While Milligan was frightening the population of LA with his 1-to-1 figure in March of 54, he declared as a flat fact. But mental institutions of the nation, there are only 700,000 patients. In December of the same year, the NIMH, under Robert Felix, issued a summary data chart showing the average daily resident-patient population was at 538,337 people, with a per capita maintenance expenditure of approximately $984.66 for the year 53. Evidently, it is all right to round off 538,337 to the nearest decimal, which is loosely translated becomes 700,000. Yeah, that's sure. At least it sounds better. Just a few moments before 1903, before the Wilburton Interstate and Foreign Commerce Committee, Bernard Wirtz, W-R-T-I-S, of Belleville, said approximately 50% of all hospitals in the United States are needed and used for this group of illness. And I cite the figure of 662,500 out of a total of 1.4 million beds. In 1961, Wirtz at New York University Medical Center received 7 of 24 grants, almost a third, to the institute by the USPHS, or $266,632. Again, that's a lot of money in 61. Charles Schaefer, lay member of the National Mental Health Committee, witnessed before the same Wilburton Committee within a few minutes of Wirtz, produced some charts from the American Medical Association showing a total of 697,521 patients for the year 1951. George Stevenson witnessed with the National Association for Mental Health following Schaefer's. Evidently, he didn't like to be pinned down to anything specific. He said these probably run around 900,000 to 950,000 cases, which all but perhaps 300,000 are in mental hospitals. So everybody's just jumping. They're just using numbers here. And what she's trying to point out here, and I won't go too much more in this because it's just pretty belaboring just to share all this, because it's just they're not doing really good statistics here. And if you're not using the same questionnaires, you're using different questions, then your studies they can't be what I call reliable. Okay. So see, in the face sheet prepared by Robert Felix, again for the same committee, same hearing figures are given at 577,000 patients hospital at the end of 50. Felix told the 1953 committee members there has been a continuous increase in resident patient population of these hospitals since 1903. Well, maybe there is. Maybe that is true. But the population is also increasing in the country too. Okay? So how can you, again, that doesn't make any sense from 1900 to 1950. Yeah, there are more people living here in the country. And if it's true, then that would make some sense that actually there was some growth in this mental health issue. But that would actually also seem to probably would be actually being reduced and actually instead of going up. Mental health fact sheet issued among the REMS literature available from the USPHS. The quantity is so voluminous that one is tempted to think their sole purpose in the production of thousands of sheets of printed paper, based on the Wolverton, spelled Wolverton, report. It's a fact. About 725,000 of the 1.5 million beds in hospitals are for patients with mental disorders. That just doesn't make sense, folks. So the USPHS apparently didn't hear Dr. Worth's figure of 662,000 of 1,425,000 hospital beds, whereas in 662,500 was less than half of 1,425,000. Sorry, 1.425 million beds. Yet the same year, the Southern California Center for Mental Hygiene reported it has more than 50% of all hospital beds for all diseases in the entire country are occupied by patients in mental hospitals. Well, how many mental hospitals were they? Okay, that's the question. And then just regular hospitals. Is that what they're speaking of here? You gotta be curious here. Where is this stuff coming from? So the NAMH was not wishing to be outdone, and based on the same hearings before the Wolverton House Committee, but notice how carefully they categorized their statement. Said nearly 750,000 people under the care of mental hospitals alone constitute more than 50% of the 1.4 million patients in all the hospitals for all diseases in the entire country. So the NAMH added this figure for observations of the mental ill an all-time high. It represented an increase of 60% in the past 20 years. And we'll continue on here. But my point simply is that I'm not going to go any further here because it's just belaboring this whole book, not belaboring, but they're just simply statistics here trying to prove certain things. And there's not many studies. In order to get more into this, you'd actually have to do more studies. But my conclusion simply is they're just looking for more money. That's all they're doing. They're skewing the poll, as we would say, to their bias, and they want to say it's getting worse. So give us more money. Give us more money to do studies. You see. So they want money. And that's what people don't understand. If that was in mental health, what is it else in the rest of the country, folks? What is more out there in this situation? You see, in other words, how many people are lying about statistics like this in order to get more money? And I'm afraid that most congressmen are not what I call gifted in asking a lot of questions and what's going on. They are probably like some people are, it's time for lunch or it's time for a break or whatever. And, because they listen to all this stuff, a lot of times. And basically, you can be completely blown away with all this, talk. So you just basically just like one ear, it goes in one ear and goes out the other ear, so to speak. Anyway, I just thought I'd share that's part of the first chapter. I will probably not read the rest of the chapter here. I'll probably go on to the chapter 2. And I appreciate you listening. Again, this is a book that basically is hard to find. Let me just say one thing is that you can broaden the scope easily by, adding more stuff. In other words, you could not more stuff, but actually they're not being particular. They're doing what I call a generalization or vague questionnaires. It's just vague. It's not specific. She says that immediately in this book. So it's very vague. So anything from one thing to another can add up to saying they went to the hospital such and such or have illnesses of such a mental illness. Okay. And it's not getting to the point. So it's a very bad study. Okay. Have a good evening. Take care. Thank you.